Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Finance, what were the main price rises that led to the 1.1% inflation surge in the September 2010 quarter, and how has the government acted to control these price rises?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, it's not at all apparent that inflation has surged. The 1.1% inflation in the last September quarter is the lowest September increase in the last 3 years. If the member hadn't noticed, certainly lower than 1.5% inflation in the September quarter in 2008. As the member knows, the Reserve Bank is responsible for the general management of inflation consistent with the Policy Targets Agreement.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
Speaker, how much of the impact of the Minister's 2.5% increase in GST costs was reflected in the 1.1% increase in prices in the September quarter? Does the Minister then stand by the Treasury's budget forecast of 5.9% inflation for 2011? And if not, is it the fragility of the recovery and persistent high unemployment that has led him to revise his estimates in the recession?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Treasury forecast for inflation for the next 12 months is probably a bit high. The Reserve Bank has since revised their forecast down to closer to 5%. The important fact here is that where GST is contributing to inflation over the next 12 months, everyone who's on a benefit or national super or on working for families has already been compensated for that increase in GST, and those who are working have had income tax cuts that are larger than the increase in GST. Therefore, the GST impact on inflation will not erode their real wages.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, how does he reconcile his claim that New Zealanders seem to be enjoying record wage increases with widespread job losses in the manufacturing, retail and construction sectors, reports that median incomes, which is where most people are in decline, and reports from Vader Advantage that record numbers of New Zealanders are struggling to pay their bills?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do it just by looking at the facts. And the facts are that real after-tax wages are rising. Inflation has been relatively low. There's been two rounds of tax cuts, and real after-tax wages are rising. And if the member was that concerned about inflation being high, why is he advocating a policy for the Reserve Bank which would ensure higher inflation?
Todd McClay.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. To the Minister, how does the latest inflation data compare with the situation historically?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, in September 2008, when the economy had been in recession for 9 months under Labor, annual inflation was 5.1% and real after-tax wages were falling, 5.1%. In the last 2 years, consumer price inflation has totalled just 3%, less than half of the inflation rate in the last 2 years of the Labor government.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, how is cutting holiday entitlements, firing workers at will with no reason given, eroding the rights of worker representatives and the rest of his government's draconian anti-worker agenda contributing to New Zealand families being better off and able to afford his government's price rises and extra GST? Or were the thousands of New Zealanders on the forecourt at lunchtime just wrong?
Order. I told the Minister a moment ago the time for the general debate was after question time. That question went on and on and on. The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government isn't doing what the member alleges. What it is doing is bringing the trial period, an employment trial period, into line with just about every other developed country. I must say it's getting very crowded on the left in the Labor Party. Phil Goff, David Cunliffe and Andrew Little all headed for that same little corner.
Please, Todd McClay.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Supplementary to the Minister.
Order. I've called Todd McClay.
Thank you. Supplementary to the Minister. What do Reserve Bank forecasts show for the inflation track over the next few years?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, in the monetary policy statement last month, the Reserve Bank forecast that headline inflation is likely to settle at around 2% through 2012-13, after reaching a peak during 2011 primarily because of GST. The GST increase. The Reserve Bank noted that a one-off GST rise and costs associated with the Canterbury earthquake will see an increase in inflation in the next year.
Question number 4, Joe Goodhue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question